Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is Monday, March 16th, 2026 at 3 o'clock, and I call this meeting to order of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. All 7 members of the board are present, or I should say present virtually, as is the elections director, Boris Brajkovic, our board counsel, Kevin Karpinski. And thank you to all the board members for being here. So we have a quorum as a result of all 7 of us being here. I do have one addition to the agenda, which is that under the board attorney's report, as board members know, Kevin has a proposed amendment to the board's photo policy, and we will discuss it and potentially act upon it at that point in the agenda. Are there any other additions or changes to the agenda?
David, for some reason, we lost Alex.
Okay, well, I'm going to proceed, but I'm going to ask Jerry to be on the lookout for him among the attendees so that we can get him back on the panel here when he gets back on. Because that is unfortunate. Okay, so next on the agenda is board president's remarks. And I do have a few things that I would and look, we got Alex back, so that's good. I do have a few things that I wanted to talk about in my preliminary remarks. First, I'd like to thank all the members of the Montgomery County State Senate delegation, which last Thursday unanimously voted to support House Bill 1083, which is Local Bill MC 626. Originally introduced by District 16 Delegate Teresa Warman, which would make our board the 23rd out of 24 local boards of elections to give voting rights to our 2 substitute members, one a Democrat, one a Republican. Senate Delegation Chair Ben Cramer kindly and unexpectedly called on me to address the delegation at the start of their discussion of the bill. And as I told the senators, our board unanimously believes that it's long past time that we do this. I'm embarrassed that it took our county this long, and I only want to be number 23 on the basketball court, not on anything else. In support of our position, Senator Craig Zucker moved to restore the June 1, 2026 effective date in the original bill and remove the House amendment that would delay the effective date until the next board takes office a year later. His motion passed unanimously, and then the Senate delegation supported the bill as amended unanimously. So it still needs to be worked out between the 2 houses. We appreciate all of the support on this issue, and we appreciate the Senate delegation's willingness to hear us out. Second, I'd like to thank all of you who have joined us today during some bad weather across the county. And we'll do our best to continue this meeting. At the moment, outside the window here at the board office in Gaithersburg, it looks okay. But if for some reason we lose our electricity and our ability to continue, we'll continue at another time. But if you miss any of today's meeting or any of our meetings, all of our meeting recordings are available online within a few days of our after the meeting. And of course, if you have questions that don't get answered in today's meeting, we're available at other times as well. In just a few minutes, we're going to have our meeting with the candidates and campaigns. We appreciate everyone who's in attendance. Election Director Boris Brajkovic is going to give the staff's presentation with a lot of information about the 2026 elections. If you have a question, we're going to ask you to put it in the question and answer feature, and we will read the relevant questions and respond to them. If you know my colleagues and me, as many of you do, you know that many of us are very interested in hearing your campaign speeches and ideas, but not today. Today is the day to listen to the PowerPoint presentation and then ask us questions about the campaign process that may be of interest to others as well as you. And please ask your questions using the question and answer feature. The chat is not enabled, and we'll do our best to answer or at least respond to every relevant question. I will point out that campaign finance issues are generally handled by the State Board of Elections, and we won't be covering those issues today. If you have a question or comment that's not about the presentation about the election, please wait for the public comment period, which is after the discussion of Boris's presentation. And as you may know from the past, there's a 3-minute limit on comments during the public comment period. Are there any other board members who would like to make a comment at this time before I turn it over to Boris? Alex.
Can you hear me, David?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can.
Okay. I just had a question. What do you think is the rationale for those members of the General Assembly who want to make the effective date 2027 for this MC? What is it? 626?
Please mute.
David, we can't hear you. Still
Still
can't
can't.
hear you.
Try that again. Can you
There
hear
you
me?
go. Yeah.
That's really bizarre because it doesn't say mute. Okay. I was just going to suggest that if we're going to discuss the legislation, let's discuss that. There's a portion of the agenda where we're talking about legislation, and I think we should wait for that if that's okay, because we do have a large number of people who are here for the discussion with the candidates, and I'd be happy to discuss the rest of that, at least from my perspective, in depth. Admittedly, I'm not the best one to explain why other people want to do that, because I think that it should be effective this year. But I can certainly try to express what I've heard said as best as I can.
Thank you.
And thank you for that question. Anyone else for comments? Okay, then I will turn it over to Boris for his presentation.
Thank you, David. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yeah, raise your hand if you can hear Boris. Okay, great. Thank you. Go ahead, Boris.
Okay, I'll just share my screen now. Good.
You're going to slideshow, right?
Yeah, I'm going to the slideshow. So, thank you all who signed up to hear today's presentation. And just a small remark: the presentation will be available, or is already available under the board meeting for March 16, 2026 materials. This presentation follows the structure of the presentation that we delivered in the run-up to the 2024 elections. And I have to thank our Manager of Water Services, Sandy Prudenti, who put many hours in putting this presentation and the numbers together. We will just go through the. Give me a second. Okay. So small introduction that gives the explanation what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. Our focus, I believe I can speak for both for the board and the staff here, is to deliver secure, efficient, convenient, and accessible elections in 2026 and going forward. One of the themes of everything that we do is continuity of service, and we will get more, we'll learn more about that when we get to the number of early voting sites, polling places, or drop boxes. We do talk a lot with our voters. We accept opinions, comments, suggestions, and everything that we do is voter-centered, and voter-centered election experience is our focus. We do try to change some processes, always looking for some improvements. Either we come up with some ideas or we try to install some good practices that we learn from our colleagues in the state of Maryland or across the nation. We do collaborate with everyone, and I think Dr. Zelaya talks a lot about that when we talk about outreach events and hundreds of outreach events that we have in the course of a year throughout the county. We use a lot of data, or we at least try to use a lot of data in our planning, in our preparations, and we serve community that has certain expectations. I can only hope that we meet those expectations, and that's exactly what we are trying to do. When it comes to the agenda of the presentation, we will just stick to the basics: voter registration information, mail-in voting, in-person voting that includes both early voting and election day, and of course, election workers. On the end, we will have a couple of key messages that I hope anyone who is on this call or anyone who will go through this presentation or listen to it later on will pick them up and do a service to the Board of Elections and to the community to pass these informations further. So, some key information about the deadlines. We want to, I believe that it's in everyone's interest that our voters update their voter registration by advanced voter registration deadline. That deadline by law is 3 weeks before the election day. So it's a June 2nd this year. Early voting will start on Thursday, June 11th, will last through Thursday, June 18th. Election day for the primary, of course, is June 23rd. You will see on the far right of this screen July 6th as the earliest date for counties to certify. So, as per election law, no county can certify the election results before this day. In 2024, we certified day after, literally. So, I hope that that will be at least we would like that to be our target for this year. But we will work towards that goal, and we will ask for your help in order to incite our voters primarily to return mail-in ballots as early as possible, the moment they are ready and they mark their ballots appropriately. Short overview of the numbers in terms of voter registration statistics. We publish monthly statistics on our website, 777vote.org, and this information is available to everyone. As it was the case in previous years, we have a very strong numbers for Democratic Party. Unaffiliated Republican Party is around 100,000, unaffiliated and others almost 200,000 registered active voters. You will also see that we have around 55,000 inactive voters. So just small explanation what inactive voter means. In essence, we do send a lot of election mail to every registered voter in the county, starting from sample ballot or any other material. Every time that election material bounces back as undeliverable because the voter does not reside on the address on the record, we have to follow the federal process and send a following confirmation mailing, which, if not responded by the voter himself, will turn the voter status to inactive. Voter will stay in inactive status for 2 consecutive federal general elections before that voter gets cancelled, unless in meanwhile voter either update their voter registration, request vote by mail, or come to vote in person during early voting or election day. So, when it comes to voter services as the pillar of our agency, of our department, there are few tasks that will stick out that the team does on daily basis, whether we are talking about election year or non-election year. We are talking about registration of new voters, updating voter registration records for voters who are already in the database, and we do training of voter registration distributors, all those volunteers who volunteer to go out and meet in the community and register new voters. We do a lot of list maintenance as a term that help our roles to be as clean as possible, as accurate as possible. You will see through this presentation, in many instances, titles are turned into links. Those links, if you follow them, will take you to learn more about the topic that is being discussed. Voter services, in addition to all of this, also process signatures collected through petitions and, of course, provisional ballots. The team covers our front area and provides excellent customer service throughout the whole process. At the bottom, you will also see a link for the cancellation of voter registration, because we try to work with our voters to be proactive and let us know the moment there is a need to cancel their registration, whether they move out of the state or they choose not to be registered for whatever reason they like. So there are a couple of products that are available through the voter services. As I mentioned earlier, the first one of them is monthly statistics. If you follow this link, you will see monthly statistics and precinct registers for the couple of years back. You will see that the affiliation changes, moving in and out of active and inactive status, or on the precinct registers, you will see the breakdown of registered voters per polling places. Everyone can request a county-wide voter registration data. This is data that provides information on all the registered voters in the counties, with the addresses and the voter history for the last 5 election cycles. When I say voter history, I just mean whether a voter actually voted or not. This data is available upon request. There's a form that needs to be filled out, and there's a $75 pay for that. Voter registry is a form if there is anyone who would like to obtain voter registration records of any registered voter. This is the form that needs to be completed and submitted to us for processing before we release the data on that particular voter. And of course, the last link takes you to where you can sign up to become a voter registration distributor. When it comes to voting options, there are no changes to previous years. There are 3 options, 3 ways to vote. I believe that we do a lot of advertising in that sense, and especially is included in our sample ballot that we send to everyone, every registered voter in the county. So the first, we will talk about vote by mail. Deadlines, I believe, for any candidate or any campaign that would like to know is the date when the mail-in ballots will be sent out to voters who requested it. So by federal law, UCAVA voters, basically military and overseas, their ballots have to go out into mail 45 days before the election law. Based on the Maryland election law, any voter who is on the permanent vote by mail list or who requests a mail-in ballot at least 60 days before the election day, those ballots have to go out 43 days before the election day. So we are talking about May 9th or May 11th when these ballots will go out. The election law allows Board of Canvassers to meet early, to start early canvass. The first day to start is June 1st, and our board is already planning for that. The rest are the deadlines when a mail-in ballot could be requested, and we would appreciate if those deadlines could be shared with anyone who interacts with you. Literally, Tuesday, June 16th is the deadline for anyone who wants to request a vote by mail ballot to be received by mail. The following Friday, June 19th, is for those voters who would like to request print your own internet delivery mail-in ballot. And of course, election day is the last day where anyone can show up in our office and we can hand them out a mail-in ballot. The law requires every proper timely postmarked mail-in ballot to be received by the board the second Friday after the election by 10 a.m. This year, that deadline will be Monday, July 6th, because the Friday is the federal holiday. When it comes to permanent mail-in ballots, let me just be very, very straight with everyone. Vote by mail is very popular in Montgomery County. We are the largest county per number of registered voters, but we are continuously above everyone else when it comes to the number of mail-in ballot requests. Currently, we have almost 118,000 people on permanent vote by mail list. And this is in addition to any request that we will receive from now until the election day. Just to compare, this number of permanent vote by mail requests was much lower in 2024, but our total number of requests for the general elections in 2024 was 192,000. So vote by mail is here. It's very much appreciated by our voters. It's one of those convenient ways to vote, especially with the number of drop boxes that we have and the opportunities to return those ballots. We provided a party breakdown of permanent vote by mail requests that you can see here, with 82,000 Democrats, 12,000 Republicans, and roughly 23,000 of unaffiliated and others. When it comes, this slide just shows the same numbers just in terms of percentages. The percentages do not necessarily follow the voter registration percentages, but I believe as we get closer to election, those percentages kind of have a tendency to level up more and to mimic voter registration numbers as they are. So when it comes to requesting a vote by mail ballot, we do advertise a lot the texting options that we have almost for everything, and you will see them throughout this presentation, and every voter will receive them in a sample ballot as we print them and send them out. VBM, the word or the letters VBM texted to 77788 will literally take you to a link where you can request mail-in ballot on your phone. VPC, to same number, is a Spanish command. All commands are available both in English and Spanish, like the rest of our election materials. Request for the mail-in ballot, you can direct any voter to our website or share the link that's available in this presentation. We also receive requests via email, or voters can call us on our general number is 240-777-8550. Sorry, for the absentee to receive instructions how to request a vote by mail ballot. Our address for everyone who would like to visit us is at the very bottom of this slide. Now, when it comes to returning a mail-in ballot, we have 58 drop boxes throughout the county. That number is the same number that we had in 2024, and locations are the same. This is one of those aspects of continuity of service that board is insisting on, to make sure that there is a familiarity for the location where people take their mail-in ballots to drop them. We, of course, provided a link in this presentation, and it's available on our website of all locations of those 58 drop boxes. Drop boxes will be installed, and we will start daily pickup of returned mail-in ballot on May 9th. We will overlap with the first mailing of mail-in ballots. Again, this is our target. We are relying on the vendors for the transports and distribution through the county. Only when all the drop boxes are in place, we will unlock them and start open them. So our plan is May 9th. If there is a delay for a day, we will let everyone know, but it's not an issue because the ballots are going as early, only on May 9th. Anyone can use the texting option to find a nearby drop box by texting box and adding their zip code to 77788. This will give 3 nearby drop boxes to whatever location you are. Of course, everyone can return the mail-in ballots through the U.S. Postal Service. I believe there are a number of postal offices throughout the county. I also believe there is over 700 of those blue USPS collection bins through the county that could be utilized to return mail-in ballot. There's a big ask here that the previous board meetings, board was insisting on the messaging, and we will be sending those messages as we get closer to election day, of course. Postmarks matter, and we advise everyone who does not return their mail-in ballot a week before the election day to take that mail-in ballot to the postal office and get it hand postmarked by the USPS clerk, or to use our Dropbox because we will collect them the same day. The reason is that USPS cannot guarantee the postmarking the same day of the ballots that are deposited in those blue USPS collection bins, which might make some mail-in ballots to be declared untimely and therefore not counted. So take your time, make up your mind, but once you're ready to vote your ballot, vote your mail-in ballot, please do so, put it in an envelope, and send it back to us. There is no reason to wait until the last day. There are different ways, as I said, to return mail-in ballots. One is the drop boxes. There are 58 through the county. I believe that over 94% of our voters reside within 3-mile radius of at least one drop box, while majority of our voters reside within 3-mile radius of multiple drop boxes. If you increase that radius to 5 miles, we are talking about 99.4% of our voters that are in that mile radius. Drop boxes, as I said, we will do the daily pickup. As we get closer to election, we will increase to twice a day. Bipartisan teams are collecting those mail-in ballots. There's a clear chain of custody. It's very safe. It's very secure. It's definitely very much tested process that we used in previous elections. In addition to drop boxes, in addition to U.S. Postal Service, please remind, or this is a message for every voter who wants to vote by mail, that they can return their mail-in ballots to any early voting site or election day polling place. Again, there is a process that involves election judges at those locations to collect voted mail-in ballots that are in envelopes at the early voting sites or election day polling places. Options to follow, anyone can follow up on the status of their mail-in ballot. You can text the word check to 77788, or there is a link embedded in this presentation to determine your ballot status. When it comes to vote by mail, we wanted to make sure that we provide more information that you can see here under mail-in voting frequently asked questions. There are a couple of products that might be interesting for some campaigns or all campaigns and candidates. It's a permanent mail-in ballot list. That list could be requested from us. You can get the list of all the voters who are on the permanent mail-in ballot list with their party affiliation and their precinct, which of course will be relevant who are running in districts, not the county-wide. Mail-in ballot label data, these are the updates of the mail-in ballot requests that include, in addition to permanent mail-in ballot, include those that are just election-specific requests. Because someone can request mail-in ballot just for the primary, just for the general, primary and general, or for all the future elections. If you sign up to receive mail-in ballot label data, once we have ballots in the building, this label data is produced weekly basis and shared with anyone who signed up to receive the list. The same goes for the permanent mail-in ballot list. On our website, we have instructions how to request it, how frequently we will be sending you the updates to that list if you sign up to receive it. There are a few links here that takes you to the State Board of Elections website. Just a second. Can you ask Jerry? It's a So, State Board of Elections website provides an overview of sent and returned mail-in ballots for each county, and Montgomery included, but that will also give you a very good comparison to other counties as well. Another link is, of course, track your ballot. We encourage everyone to track their own ballots once they request them, and those ballots are in transit from the vendor who sends them out. Cancel my mail-in ballot request or voter registration update. I would like to bring this square to everyone's attention, because any voter who requests mail-in ballot and show up in person to vote in person during early voting or election day will have to vote a provisional ballot unless they request to cancel their vote by mail ballot earlier. There are two ways to do it. One is online under voter registration update. Voters can go online and request to be removed from the permanent mail-in ballot list or to cancel their already submitted vote by mail request. This option is available until the advanced deadline for voter registration, which is June 2nd. After that, the only remaining option is to use cancel my mail-in ballot request form, which is available on this presentation as a link, to fill it out and send it back to us via email, mail, in person, whichever way is suitable for the voter. However, once we receive that request, we just ask everyone to wait to give us 24 hours, because we still have to process that request, and that data has to be updated to the poll books that are available during early voting or election day. So, if you requested mail-in ballot, but you changed your mind and you would like to vote in person, please cancel your mail-in ballot request, or you will need to vote a provisional ballot. This is the part that, if I shamelessly may ask any campaign and candidate to help us with. These graphs indicate the pace of return of mail-in ballots throughout the county. We started tracking this in 2022, gubernatorial primary, GP, moved to 2022 gubernatorial general, and of course 2024 presidential general. This graph indicates the pace of returned mail-in ballots through the drop boxes in the given election. Keep in mind, roughly half, if not more, mail-in ballots are returned through drop boxes. You will also notice that it's a rather flat line from left to the right, with a high spike in the last few days before the election day. You will also notice that that line was not as flat in 2024 as it was in 2022 primary. It was better, but we still believe that we could collect more mail-in ballots from those voters who made up their mind, already voted those ballots, and have them sealed in the envelope somewhere in the kitchen, somewhere in the car, or somewhere in the bag, waiting for a good opportunity to drop them in. The reason we are asking for this is that more mail-in ballots we receive before the election day, it's better because we can canvass them before the election day, we can publish the results on election night. And of course, it speeds up the certification process after the election day. So I know that we will do the messaging as a staff. I know that 7 board members do this messaging as a part of their everyday conversation with anyone, that take your time, but if you made up your mind, please complete your mail-in ballot and give it back to us. We are asking anyone who is on this call, any campaign, any candidate, to do the same. Again, there is certain improvement if you follow the graphs, but we still believe with the 120,000 ballots that we already know that will be sent out 45 days before the election day, this slope could look different in 2026 as well. So, canvass is the process where the staff, where the canvassers, bipartisan teams of canvassers, open envelopes that contain mail-in ballot. There's a picture of them here. That process is conducted with the presence of the Board of Canvassers, which is comprised of 7 board members. Legal counsel is required to be present as well. As I said, election law allows local board to start early 8 business days before the early voting start. I believe it's legal definition, which falls on June 1st this year. You might recall that in previous years we canvassed at the Montgomery College Germantown campus. This year we will do it on site in this building because we expanded our footprint. So we have a new training and canvas center that will be used for training election judges until June 1st, and after June 1st it will be used as a canvas center. The address is the same. It's 18753 North Frederick Avenue in Gaithersburg. The suite is 203. We will continue, as in previous years, to live stream our canvas. I believe that we might have been the only county that did it a few years in a row, but we will continue with that process. And the canvas time usually is 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Again, depending on the volume of the ballots that are returned and prepared by the staff for canvas. When it comes to the canvas dates, this is tentative schedule that's subject to change. The biggest reason for change, again, is the volume of returned mail-in ballots. We organize our ballots in batches that follows precinct designations, so we have to have certain quantity in the building to meet those batch standards, so we can send them to the canvas for the canvassers to open and to be scanned afterwards. So this is tentative schedule. It will be available on our website. Live stream links will be added to each of these dates. And if there is a cancellation for whatever reason, we tend to publish that on our website, minimum 24, but I would say at least 48 hours before the cancellation. So if you come across, or if voters who have questions about mail-in voting, or if you have questions about mail-in voting, these are the quick answers. There's always a possibility to request mail-in ballot via texting option. We provide a lot of information now on our website, 777vote.org. There's a link how to request mail-in ballot. Of course, there's our address to visit us. There's email to send us, or the phone to call us. When it comes to early voting, again, continuity of service, 14 centers. As just for the background, we are legally required to have 13 based on the number of registered voters, and the law gives an option to have additional 14 early voting site if there is agreement between the Board of Elections and the governing body of the county, in this case, county executive and county council. That was always an agreement that was in place, so we continue to have 14 early voting centers. The locations of those 14 early voting centers are the same as they were in 2024. Again, early voting dates is Thursday, June 11th to Thursday, June 18th, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. We provide the link in these presentations with all the locations. Again, text EV plus the zip code and to 77788, and you will get addresses of the nearby early voting sites. Near early voting sites. On our website, when the early voting starts, we provide update of the wait times at each early voting site. So whoever wants to vote early, please visit our website, 777vote.org, before you go to your preferred early voting site to learn about wait times. If you want to avoid definitely any wait time as per historical data, please vote on Saturday and Sunday. Those are the low volume, low turnout dates, and we are open again 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on those dates too. When it comes to election day, just a general knowledge, Montgomery County has 260 precincts. When it comes to the polling places, we will have 230 in 2026 primary election. There are 7 location changes if you compare designated polling places for the primary election and compare them to 2024 general, you will see that we provided a link with those changes in the presentation. We also provide links to precinct maps and the definitions of precincts to district maps. So you can look at the map, you can find all the precincts that are in any particular district, whether it's a councilmanic, a legislative, or congressional. We also provide a list of polling places, both in alphabetical order and the numerical order. Anyone who would like to learn what their polling place is, because they are uncertain, they can text the word check to 77788 and they will receive that information. Note on the end, on this part, is that once we send the sample ballots out to over 700,000 registered active voters in Montgomery County, on the last page, at the very back of the sample ballot, there is the address of each voter's polling place as assigned based on their voter registration record. These are the changes compared to 2024, changes in terms of locations or the buildings. So if you are running in the district that is that contains one of these polling places, this might be of particular interest to you. Just keep in mind that information about these changes have been already communicated to affected voters as legally required. As we get closer to the election day, we will have a So we already mailed voter notification card to every voter who is affected by these changes of polling places. The new polling places will be on the sample ballots booklets. We will put the signs at the old polling places for anyone who might have missed our communication, just to tell them this is no longer your polling place. New polling place is whatever the new address is. And at the active polling places, we put precinct maps. So if you enter the polling place, you will see a map. If your residential address is within the map, you are at the right place, you are at the right polling place. Something interesting for anyone who is running as a candidate or as a campaign, at the very top, under the mailed part of this slide, you will see a link for the polling place discussion notification. So anyone can sign up to be notified 2 weeks before any board meeting where board is discussing any changes to the polling places. So if you follow this link, polling place discussion notification, leave your name and the email address, going forward, you'll be notified 2 weeks before each board meeting where the board will be discussing polling place changes. When it comes to no electioneering zones, campaigns will be in full mode, I expect pretty soon. Few basic information that no electioneering zone in Montgomery County is usually 25 feet. Some instances is a bit more because of the safety and the way the facilities are organized. In particular, this refers to the circles or roundabouts in front of the schools or other centers that are less than 25 feet. The no electioneering zone, just like it exists to the facilities that hold polling places, there is no electioneering zone for the drop boxes, and that zone is 25 feet as well. On this presentation, we provided links to no electioneering maps for both early voting sites and election day polling place. So if you follow these links, you can find the early voting site of your interest or the polling place of your interest. You will see real pictures with the markings where no electioneering zone starts or where it will start on election day. When it comes to electioneering, few messages that I believe are very much consistent to what was the message for the 2024 and what it contains in the letter that was sent from the board president David Naiman and the board secretary Amy Hober and me few days ago to anyone who filed to be on any of Montgomery County ballots. Again, non-electioning zone is usually 25 feet. Overnight storage area for campaign signs during early voting may be available in some but not all early voting sites. We will talk a bit more about that quite soon. If the storage for the campaign materials is available, it's limited. So there is a practice was introduced before first come, first serve, because the space is limited. Number of signs or number of campaigns that can store their materials overnight is also limited. Facilities cannot assume liability for campaign materials that are left there or the way they are stored or if something gets damaged. There was one big message that we pushed in 2024 for any campaign, and we will try to emphasize that again. Please protect landscaping. I think I reported in 2024 a situation where one supporter of a campaign came up with a 4x4 pole and dig a hole in front of on the lawn in front of the early voting site to start it. If you can work with your volunteers who will be doing electioneering or campaign promotion for you or on your behalf in front of early voting sites or election day polling places, please, if you can encourage them to be mindful of parking spaces that they are occupying for the whole day. We would like to see parking spaces closest to the entrance to the facilities available to our voters, especially ADA parking, so we can promote a smooth voting experience for anyone as possible. And the last message, of course, communication and engagement among campaigns and people who promote your campaign, you as a candidate, throughout the whole day in front of early voting sites or election day. I think that we all appreciate civility of those interactions and communication. When it comes to the polling place assessments, I know what we are looking for every year. We provide the comment cards for our voters to rank us, how we organize the polling place, how election judges performed. You might have noticed that in 2024, we, in addition to the paper comment card, we introduced the QR codes, which we will try to push even more this year. I believe some 14,000 people used it to give us their assessment how we did at the polling places. And of course, we count on our partners, League of Women Voters, to conduct the assessment of our performance during election day. Elections are highly dependent on number of volunteers who sign up to serve. And it will be no surprise to anyone on this call if me and any board member, any staff member, Gilberto in particular, go out through the county and ask people to volunteer to serve as election judges. We are a big county. We have 14 early voting sites. We have 230 polling places. We have 58 drop boxes. We have a very big nursing home assistance program. We need election judges. We need election workers for all those tasks to be implemented in a manner that is expected by our community. We like to not have long wait times. We like to have sufficient staffing at the polling place to provide assistance to anyone who might need it. There are different ways how we can look at the numbers of the election judges and volunteers that we need. But in our county, we are looking around 7,000 service days in one election. We are talking about roughly 3,500 to 4,000 on election day, around up to 3,000 during early voting. Calculate how many election judges we need per each early voting site for 8 days, plus election drop box pickups, nursing home visits, and similar. High school election worker program, we are present in each high school. Anyone who is 16, U.S. citizen, resident of Maryland, and registered to vote or interested to register to vote, we invite them to serve as election judges. So this will be the backbone of our presentation, with emphasis that this presentation itself is just an opening, because we try to embed so many links that will provide you more detailed information that you can use, or will provide you link to the products and services that you can request and we can provide to you to make your campaign or your messaging to voters, your support easier. When it comes to key messages, we would like, again, to ask you to pass some messages along that I believe are beneficial to the efficiency, effectiveness and of the elections in Montgomery County and overall experience of our voters. First message is register to vote. We would like to see anyone who is eligible to register to actually register to vote. The second message is update your voter registration. If you have moved, we understand that your priority is to set up in the new place, I don't know, get connected to PEPCO or WSSC or something. But at some point, please update your voter registration so you can receive the right sample ballot, you can vote the right polling place, and similar. Deadline to register is June 2nd. You can update your voter registration until that day. If you don't register by June 2nd, but you are eligible to register, please keep in mind, same-day registration is available during early voting and election day. Some documents need to be brought up with you and provided at the polling place. When it comes to mail-in voting, again, if that is your preferred way of voting, please submit the request now so we can process it, so we can have you on the list, so we can send you a ballot 45 or 43 days before the election. Nothing is instant. Even if you request to receive print your own ballot that's delivered through web, it's nothing instantaneous. We still have to receive your request. We still have manually to process it, and only then you will receive the link. We process those requests in order they were received. Historically, we always have a certain amount of backlog as we get closer to election. We try to minimize that backlog by encouraging anyone. If vote by mail is your option of voting, please go online and request your mail-in ballot now. If you already requested mail-in ballot, but you want to vote in person going forward, please go online, cancel your mail-in ballot request, or download the form and send it back, complete it and send it back to us, so we can cancel your mail-in ballot request and you can vote a regular ballot at the polling place. If you are signing up to receive mail, to vote by mail, in your request, you can choose how to be notified about status of your ballot. Please select via text or email. That's the fastest. Those notifications are sent literally the night when we process your request, the night we process your ballot, whether we received it in the building or we send it to the canvas or we actually scan it to be counted. So if you have not filled out that field in your request, mail-in ballot request before, you can still do it. Just go in, update it, choose text or email. This is how notifications will be sent to you. When it comes to canvas, we usually have around 50 canvas teams per each canvas day of bipartisan teams. That's 100 people. We need a lot of volunteers. Please sign up for that. If you would like to watch our canvas, as I said, link will be available on our website. Or if you would like to come and observe canvas in person, everyone is welcome. Our building, Suite 203, the doors will be open. When it comes to in-person voting, again, early voting dates, June 11, June 18, Thursday to Thursday. The lowest volume or the pressure or the wait times is the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays. Historically, the biggest pressure, the long lines, are last few hours on the last day. Our website will provide the wait times for anyone who would like to know wait times during early voting before they go there to vote. So that would be, I don't know, I cannot say short, but that will be the presentation that staff prepared for this primary election. Again, the presentation itself is just a vehicle for number of links that are embedded in it that you would explore, I believe, to learn more about what's valuable for you, what products we can provide, and you'll communicate with us as we go forward. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Boris. Next, next we will, hang on one second. You turn your sound off, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So next we're going to hear from Gabe Albornoz. And this is not a time warp, that he is the head of the Recreation Department, as he was, I believe, from 2007 to 2018. He took a bit of a sabbatical from the Recreation Department to serve on the county council. I realize that's not really a sabbatical, but he did have a break in service with the Rec Department, and now he's back at the Rec Department. I'll just say that the Recreation Department is a very important partner for the Board of Elections in putting on elections, and we very much appreciate the cooperative attitude that the Recreation Department has had since as long as I've been on the board. Very much appreciate your being here. And I think he's going to talk about some of the opportunities for storage of materials. Gabe, please go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, David, and good afternoon, good people. It is a pleasure and honor to be with all of you. Let me just begin by acknowledging the incredible Board of Elections and Boris and his wonderful team for the hard work that they do, not just during the election season, but year-round. As a county resident, I have seen their work from multiple angles, and I am proud of their commitment to ensuring safe elections and wonderful elections for all of us. So yes, I am now once again serving as the director of our county's Recreation Department. And as you heard earlier, the Recreation Department is proud to host 10 of the 14 early voting locations across the county. And this is a responsibility that we take very seriously. And there is a lot of work that goes into ensuring a smooth process every election cycle. One of the things, as Boris mentioned, that we've been offering for a number of years now is the opportunity for campaigns to store their materials, some of their materials, tables, chairs, and the like, at our recreation centers during the period of early voting. Because I can speak in the first person, knowing how difficult it is to set up all of the campaign materials and bring them and lug them back and forth in between days. And so we do what we can within reason to be able to provide support and provide storage. I did want to share a little bit of context, though, that it was brought to my attention in that the last election cycle, there were a couple of incidents that have caused us to, while still making the opportunity available, just making sure that we have a very reasonable honor system here as people store their materials. The Department of Recreation, just a few weeks after early voting has launched, will be launching its camps. And so our buildings will be full of all of our camp materials and lots of balls and arts and activities. And so storage will already be at a premium during early voting. And so each of our 10 facilities will have a unique circumstance in what we can be able to provide. And what we humbly ask our campaigns is that you please be respectful. It was brought to my attention that 2 years ago, there was an incident in which a volunteer for a campaign got very upset, and one of our staff members who was trying to organize a room that had grown to a point of disarray and was going to be hosting a meeting later that day and was just trying to organize things. And one of the volunteers of the campaign got very upset and verbally abusive to one of our staff for moving some of their materials, again, just to organize a room. So we just ask that everybody please be respectful. We are working, and it's not ready yet, but we are working on a very simple and straightforward agreement that we're going to ask campaigns to sign for this upcoming election cycle. If you'd like to store materials within our facilities, that you just provide some very reasonable policies and that you're responsible for those materials. But I don't want to go much further than that. And just my last thought is to thank all of you as a resident of this county, having lived here my whole life and having seen this from multiple angles. I just want to express my appreciation to all of the campaigns for your interest in serving our community in this way. I acknowledge the sacrifice that it is and how difficult it is, but also how important it is. So thank you all for your interest in serving. And we at the Recreation Department look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
And Gabe, thank you for your service in a variety of different capacities for the county, which we've been very lucky to benefit from, and in particular, thanks to the Rec Department for being such a great partner over so many years. I'm going to have just a couple of remarks, and then we're going to go to questions that have been submitted shortly. Every election can be stressful, and every election has new things and unanticipated events. And this year's election is very likely to continue that tradition, which will be stressful enough. We would like to ask all of you to be courteous to each other, to election workers, to voters, and to other candidates and campaign workers of all ages and backgrounds. It's not only the right thing to do, in my opinion, as someone who has worked on campaigns for decades since I was a kid, it's also the politically smart thing to do. Most, if not all of us who have been electioneers know how difficult it can be, but any attempts to debate with the other candidates or campaigns in your primary race or the other political party will both waste your time, since very few, if any, campaign volunteers can be convinced at the polls to change their minds, and raise the figurative temperature. Please do your best to get along, which will be a more pleasant experience for all of you, and actually, in my opinion, smart politics too, especially if your candidate makes it to the general election and has opposition there. The rules for overnight storage that Gabe was just talking about at any of our early voting locations that are the Rec Department facilities, they apply to everyone. Okay, no one is allowed to make their own special deals with any of our 14 facilities. If a facility such as the Sandy Spring Fire Department or the Activity Center at Boer Park tells us that they are not storing materials overnight, that means no one can store their materials there overnight. If you have an inn of some kind, you are not allowed to use it. To be fair to everyone, everyone needs to be subject to the same rules and conditions. And please try to be kind to each other. Elections are almost always stressful for candidates and campaigners and frequently for voters. And this year, I think, especially for voters. And there's really no benefit in making it more stressful. I volunteered on campaigns for decades, and in my experience, fighting at the polls doesn't convince anyone and almost always only turns off the voters to everyone who's involved. And many of you who are lucky enough to prevail in the primary election will want the support of your primary opponents in the general election, so getting along may be in your political interests in addition to being the right thing to do. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of my thoughts there. Ami, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
I would just reinforce that same point. I've been a candidate. I know how stressful it is. And I just want everyone to remember there's always tomorrow.
Indeed, and we have many examples of people who have even been unsuccessful in campaigns and then became successful in future ones. So that's a very good reminder. Okay, we're gonna go to the questions. In different instances, I may refer questions to other people, and we'll try to get through all of them as far as I'm concerned. The first question was, will the passage of the SAVE Act have any bearing on your processes and or procedures for your office in both the primaries and the general elections in November? That will depend on if it were to pass, when it were to pass, and what its effective date would say, and what is physically possible. We really don't know whether it would be passed in sufficient time to be in effect for the primary. But obviously, we follow federal law. if it applies to us. Kevin, anything to add to that?
No, I think you've hit the nail right on the head, David. I think it'll depend on one, if it passes, and then the effective date if it does pass. And what, if any, challenges there may be to it?
Yes, that's another possibility. It could pass and then it could have a court challenge, and the courts might be capable of delaying its effective date or not. And we would obviously be monitoring that very closely if that were to happen.
Right.
Okay, thank you. The next question, what's the criteria to become an inactive voter? Boris, would you like to take a stab at that one?
Okay. So
I'm off.
sorry.
You want me to take it, David?
It's F1 that you hit that turns off your speaker.
Can you hear me?
I'll turn mine on if you want.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay.
I've unmuted mine. Why don't you just go ahead?
Okay, I'm good now. Oh, okay. So it's the criteria to become inactive is actually based on the successful mailing of election materials to any registered voter. The federal law requires that any piece of election mail that is returned to us as undeliverable, if we send it to the voters, to the address on the record of the voter, be further processed and followed by confirmation mailing sent to the same address. If that confirmation mailing is returned again as undeliverable, those are two pieces of mail that indicate that that voter does not reside on the address that that voter was previously registered. We are legally obliged that moment to turn the status of that voter to inactive. So the criteria to become inactive is initial bounced election mail and returned confirmation mailing sent to the same address as per federal law. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Boris.
David, may I just add one thing to that?
Please go ahead.
Just for full context, once you become an inactive voter, you remain there for 2 election cycles. But you become an active voter as if you're in an inactive status and you go and vote, you automatically become an active voter. And if you sign a petition, you become an active voter. So there are ways where one becomes inactive and then returns to be an active voter, either through signing a petition and or voting in one of the elections, in an election.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question that we've received is confirming the recording of this presentation will be available in email to all participants. We will definitely have a recording of the presentation on our website within a few days, and we will send all candidates an email with a link to where to find it on our website. Okay, the next question was, can you explain the print your own ballot in the prior slide? I'm going to give it a go, and then if others want to do something with it, they can. Essentially, if you get your ballot by mail, you have a choice to have it sent to you by U.S. mail, or you have a choice to get a link where you can go online, print the ballot yourself. And if you print the ballot yourself, it is your printer, your ink, your paper, your envelope, your postage if you use the U.S. Postal Service in order to send it back to us. When it comes back to us, since you're using your paper, which is not necessarily standard ballot paper, in fact, it almost certainly isn't standard ballot paper, after you've used the 21st century technology to get your ballot, we use a 17th century technology to hand copy it onto ballot paper. We do that in bipartisan teams so that there's always more than one person checking to make sure that the duplication is done correctly. And then the ballots that are on ballot paper are what is run through our scanners in order to count those ballots. Some of you may know that we've had a number of recounts in 2018 and 2022. I believe in all of after 3 recounts in different elections, I think we found 1 duplication error in all of that time. Our duplicators have done an excellent job, and they're very careful. But if you're uncomfortable with having your ballot duplicated, then that may not be the method of voting for you. On the other hand, if you are very suspicious of the United States Postal Service and you want to get your ballot and return it without the Postal Service having any opportunity to deal with your ballot, if you get the print your own ballot, otherwise you may hear it referred to as the web delivered ballot, but if you get that ballot through electronic means, and then you print it, and then you go through all the process, you sign the oath, you return it, you can return it to a Dropbox, doesn't have to be returned in the U.S. mail, and then it will come back to us as well. It's an option for voters. It's definitely a more labor-intensive option for both voters and for election workers, but it is an available option. Is there anything that I've left out that you want me to add to that? Okay, I'm seeing heads shaking no. So we'll go on to the next question. Can campaign volunteers talk to voters and provide campaign literature standing in line outside of the no electioneering zone? When you mean outside of the no electioneering zone, you mean you are beyond the no electioneering zone. So you're in the area where if a voter was walking up from their car, you could hand them something or talk to them, and a voter is in line in that area, then yes, you can talk to the voters while they're outside of that. I would not advise it if the voters tell you they don't want to talk to you, but it is permissible as long as you are outside of the no electioneering zone in order to talk to voters and provide campaign literature. Anyone have anything to add to that? Okay, next question. Is anything being done to prepare for the possibility of federal agents being present at the polls? Well, I could give you the glib answer, which is yes. But I don't think I want to go too much further than that. There are a number of people who would be involved in anything like that. In every election, we prepare for all kinds of eventualities, including bad weather, we've had, over the years, there's been, Kevin can tell us more because he's been the board attorney for so long, but we've had all kinds of things that have come up with elections that we've had to respond to. And not to mention the pandemic, basically, one of the greatest things about election workers is their ability to adapt to changing circumstances. And that is definitely one of the circumstances that we will be ready for. We will not be anytime soon, and maybe ever, announcing exactly what we would do if federal agents were to come to the polls, but we definitely will be ready. Okay, is Ride-On making special stops at early voting centers this year? I don't know the answer to that question. There is legislation pending that would require them to do so. It's pending in the legislature. It has not passed yet. It is an administration bill. Boris, do you happen to know the answer to that question?
The bill is going through the process.
Right, but do you happen to know, absent the bill, we're not aware of any special plans for Ride-On buses.
So maybe we stick to the same Ride-On same schedule, right?
Correct.
Okay.
They have the same schedule, and then our website will be updated as we get closer with additional Ride-On information pertaining to.
Okay, I don't know if everyone could hear that, but I'll just say that as of now, Ride-On will follow its normal schedule. If we get any updates, we will be informing people of that. There is legislation pending in Annapolis. It's actually an administration bill proposed by the State Board of Elections to require buses to stop at early voting centers. And obviously, if that legislation becomes law, we will be letting everyone know that that is the case and that will be available. Okay, then we'd say we have a thank you to the Montgomery County Board of Elections team for hosting today's meeting. I truly appreciate all the efforts to ensure we have a smooth election process. That is from a candidate for office, so I am going to take the chair's prerogative to not name that person because this is not an appropriate time for us to do that, or else I'd have to read everybody's name who wants to get in on that. But I see who you are, and thank you very much for that. It's very much appreciated. In 2022, there was an issue in electronic ballot voting, in particular with the county council at large race, where there were 8 candidates and split screens. The issue was that if the voter did not go to the second screen, then it is likely votes were lost for the second screen candidate because the voter did not see all of the candidates. This cycle, there will be 17 council at large candidates. Has this issue been addressed? The short answer is it has been addressed but not resolved. And this board has been talking about that issue since way before 2022, since roughly 2015. We noticed this issue before the machines were even used in Montgomery County elections. They were used in a city election before that. We have been assured that the next voting system, which hopefully will be taking effect for 2028, will be better and will at least have the ability to have 2 columns of voters. But for this election, we will be in the same circumstance that we were in 2022. To be a little more precise, I believe that you do have to go to the subsequent screens. I don't believe that if you are using the ballot marking device, that you can actually skip the screens completely. But if you've already voted for 4 candidates for county council at large, and you get to the second screen and you want to vote for a 5th one, you have to go back and unselect one of your previous choices in order to select a new choice. And there is some confusion about which button you push because one button takes you back one screen and one button takes you back to the beginning. We are very aware of this problem. We will do everything we can to inform voters about it so that they are not confused. No one has been louder on this issue than I have. My very first meeting with the state administrator, I think he actually brought this up before I did because he knew that it was important to Montgomery County. But it has not been fixed for the 2026 election. So anyone who ends up on the second or third page, I would urge you to do your best to inform voters of what they need to do in order to vote for you. And we, of course, will be doing that as part of our outreach as well. Is there anything else on that subject? Okay. To be clear, if a person is an inactive voter, they don't have to register again. They can simply go vote. Is that a correct statement, Boris?
That's correct. Correct statement. My God. That's correct.
You muted.
Yes.
That good?
No, you're not. Okay, I'll turn mine on.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So it's a correct statement with the caveat that once you go to the polling place, you will have to sign a printout to affirm your residential address, or you will have to complete the voter update form to provide your new address of residence. So if you're an active voter, please go online, update your voter registration, you'll become active. If you want to vote by mail, the moment you request mail-in ballot, you will become active. You can go to the polling place, you will vote, you'll update your voter registration there, and you'll become active.
Okay, thank you, Boris. The next question is not really about the current election. It's about future ones, but I'm going to read it quickly and answer it quickly and move on. What is the process for determining whether the 14th Early Voting Center has a cost benefit or should be removed for future years? Specifically, White Oak early voting turnout is by far the lowest voter turnout. How much does it cost to run this early voting center? What can be done to save taxpayer funds for a 14th site that is not required and is not performing at the level of others? First comment I would make is that we've always had some early voting centers that have fewer people participating than others. Long before we had the early voting centers, we had 14 early voting centers. That is a decision that gets made more than 6 months before the election as to how many early voting centers we will have and where they will be located. If you are interested in our making a change, the time to tell us that is not today. It is more than 6 months before the next election. And by next election, I don't mean the general election. I mean the 2028 election. Come talk to us in 2027 or our successors if we're not the ones who are still on the board in 2027. And that would be the time to talk with us about the 14th early voting site. I will say that is, according to the law, we are required to have 13, and 14 is by agreement between the county government and the Board of Elections. We believe it's really important to have early voting all over the county. And it's not necessarily the case that the early voting center with the lowest number of voters is the one that is the easiest one to eliminate. And I'm quite sure that whoever it is that is concerned about the White Oak Early Voting Center, if I were to talk about the Damascus Early Voting Center, which used to be the lowest one, they might have a different view. We try to have voting available for as many people as possible, and we try to reevaluate at the end of every election as to what we should do. Okay, next question. Successive and consecutive meaning in county code is the last amendment term limiting county executive position to 2 terms, missing some language. And is the spirit of the law that after 2 terms they can no longer run, or is it 2 terms maximum that they can run again after a break? Kevin, I think I'm going to ask you to speak to that. The question, I believe, if I were to reinterpret, I can read it again if that would be helpful, but essentially the question is, did the term limit amendment that passed previously limit the county executive to 2 lifetime terms or to 2 consecutive terms?
Oh, well, I'm not the county attorney, so I'm not tasked with interpreting the county charter, but in my view, and it's just my view, it is 2 consecutive terms. There was an opportunity if someone felt the county executive could not run for county council to go ahead and challenge that when he filed as a candidate. No one did that. So, there are no challenges that have been asserted as to his eligibility to run.
Okay. I believe those are, I might have just gotten one more question and then we will move on. Let me see. All right. Someone has responded by saying the limit is 2 consecutive terms. I believe that the question was asking us that question, but in any event, because of the lack of a legal challenge to this point, we don't have someone running for a 3rd term as county executive. We have someone running for a term on the county council, and there has been no legal challenge to that, so he will be on the ballot for county council. Okay, this is not your absolute last opportunity. There is one more question. I'm going to come back to that when I finish this statement. This is not the absolute last opportunity for you to ask us questions. This is just your last opportunity to ask us at this particular board meeting. We are about as accessible as any government entity that you can think of. And if questions arise, I hope you will let us know. Our email address is elections@montgomerycountymd.gov. Our phone number is 240-777-8500. And if you know any of us, you certainly can reach out to us, and we will do our best to answer your questions. But we have always found that, this is something that we started since I became president of the board. We have found that doing this all at once with everybody has its advantages so that everybody can hear the same answers at least once and allow those questions get answered. Last question, then we're going to move on. When can yard signs be set up and on public property? I'm not sure that they can be on public property except for during voting. So I'm going to, rather than doing this off the top of my head, I'm going to ask those who are fluent in this to answer. But I believe that for election day, you can put your signs up at polling places at 5 p.m. the day before election day. I believe for early voting that you have a similar requirement, 5 p.m. the day before early voting begins. The law would require you to take them down by 8 a.m. on the day after Election Day. We are a little nicer than that, especially since a number of us have been election workers and know that the day after Election Day, 8 a.m. is a little bit tough. And we have, in our agreements with the facilities, we've given until 12 noon for people to remove their signs. We would encourage you to please do that, and not just leave your signs up for others to take down. In terms of public property that are not polling places, my understanding is that is not a permissible place to put a sign, but that is not our job to enforce. Go ahead, Boris.
So very briefly, any signs that are placed outside of the areas around early voting centers and polling places that David described the rules for will fall under the county's Department of Permitting Services, their regulations. We already spoke with the DPS. We expect that they will produce a guide that will be available on their website with the dates and locations and rules that are to be followed by the campaigns and candidates to post their signs throughout the county. Again, if we are talking about early voting sites, Election Day polling places, or the drop boxes right outside of those facilities, right outside of non-electioneering zone, yes, Board of Elections is your partner. If we are talking about public spaces throughout the county, it's Department of Permitting Services, and we expect that they will produce the guide pretty soon and have it on their website. We'll be more than happy to have it available with us as well.
I'll just add to that we already have the smallest no electioneering zone in the state. That 25-foot rule is only Montgomery County. No one else has that rule. It's 100 feet in every other jurisdiction. So if your signs are within that 25 feet or within the no electioneering zone, don't expect them to stay there. Because a lot of people already worked hard to have a different rule in Montgomery County. We will enforce the rule as it exists. It's a very generous rule, and we hope that everyone will abide by it. But in terms of the when, 5 o'clock before the day before early voting, 5 o'clock the day before Election Day. Okay. Well, we thank you very much. We're going to move on in our agenda. We appreciate all of you from the candidates, campaigns, and parties. Thank you for being here. And Gabe Albornoz, thank you very much for joining us today, for being a great partner. And we're obviously going to continue that great partnership as we go forward. So the next thing on our agenda is the public comment period. Lisa, do we have anyone who has signed up for public comment? Okay, we do not have anyone who has signed up for public comment. It appears that I have someone with their hand up. And if you are attempting to give public comment, then I guess we have to assume that while their hand is up, because we have no other way of finding out. So can we promote JD Kumar? Is Jerry available to do that? Okay. Okay, I can see that you are now.
Oh, there I am.
Okay, there you are.
Oh, hi.
Mr. Kumar, thank you for joining us. I'm assuming that your comment is not about the presentation that we just had, but about another subject.
Yeah,
you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I'm a candidate for the United States House of Representatives, Congress, District 8, our District 8. And I want to know where your website, where I can find rules about canvassing, for example, in apartments that are, securitized with a lobby, um, um, in public places like shopping centers. What are the rules for setting up little booths um, and not, canvassing, knocking on doors?
I am not sure that that is in the jurisdiction of the Board of Elections, but I'm going to defer to our counsel, Kevin Karpinski, to see if he has an
Mhm.
answer for you.
I will add a little detail on this. There's differentiation between solicitation and political canvassing. So if you see a no solicitation sign, it's not the same because that means you're selling a product or service. And political canvassing is protected under our constitutional free speech rights. So I just want to know how to safely approach people in different settings, public places. Clearly, private businesses can set their own rules.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. I just don't know if we're the ones to provide the answer. But let me see what Mr.
Yeah,
Karpinski has to say.
well, yes, David, that's really sort of beyond the jurisdiction of the Board of Elections. Obviously, if it's a private location, they are going to set their own rules, and if it's a public building, then that public building is going to go ahead and set their own rules. But obviously, that gets into a person's First Amendment rights, to go ahead and engage in various political activities. But that would not be something that the Board of Elections would be responsible for. That would be whatever governmental entity is involved with that particular venue.
No, I understand, but it sounds, the response is a bit bureaucratic. I just want to know where if you guys can help, where I can go to one of the many resources the county might have to be very clear on, political campaigning. I mean, clearly you spent a lot of time talking about electioneering and how to store election material and so forth. But I'd like to know very clear, clean lines, rules of how you can do what you can do. Shopping centers, setting up little booths, so forth.
Mr.
I
Kumar,
suppose.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do want to say that there's a big difference in terms of our powers between when people are voting, which is what we were talking about for early voting and election day, and when people are not and are just going about their business, which is really out of our jurisdiction. And that may sound bureaucratic to you, but it's the truth. Our powers are not unlimited. And so what we're saying to you is that while I understand and appreciate the desire for clear rules that apply everywhere, it may not be that simple under the law that there are clear rules that apply everywhere. And in any event, we're not the ones who apply them. So I would suggest that there may be other sources of information other than us that you may need to consult in order to find out, for example, what shopping centers are doing, or what's happening in other places. We have very limited jurisdiction over facilities that we use for voting purposes while we're doing voting. That is what that is where our jurisdiction lies.
Well, let me just put the last question to you. In a typical canvassing, people go home to home, and unless there's a no trespass sign, they can knock on the door. But what about in apartment buildings? Just because it's an apartment building, does that mean it's not the same as a single family home?
I'm going to call on you in a second, Ami. I would love to give you my opinion, but my opinion is just my opinion as someone who's
anyway. So you have the issue. Perhaps we can have it work through the county and figure this out. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm telling you that it's really not within our jurisdiction to tell apartment houses what they can and cannot permit. But anyway, Ami, go ahead. Ami Hober is our board secretary.
I will just make one last statement.
Mr. Kumar, I didn't call on you. Please wait 1 minute. I'm calling on Ms. Hober.
No, I was just saying, as a former candidate, my recommendation to you is to go to your party's central committee and ask them about the rules for campaigning.
Yeah.
They would be a good source for that.
Yeah, my research shows that it's protected under our First Amendment of freedom of speech to be able to approach people. But you know, there is differentiation between soliciting and political canvassing. So
And there's also differentiation between public property and private property, and it's a very complicated area of law. It is. I wish that we could tell you that there are bright line rules. And I even wish we could tell you that we make them and we could tell you what they are, but that we don't make them, and therefore we're not in a position to tell you what they are. But we appreciate your coming to speak with us. If we are aware of any other resources that we can suggest for you, we'd be happy to let you know that. But we are not the ones who make those decisions for those locations.
thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mhm.
Okay, let's move on. The next thing on the agenda is for board members to disclose campaign contributions and attendance at fundraisers. Do any board members have a disclosure to make? Okay, seeing none, we will now go to the election director's report. Go ahead, Boris.
Okay. I hope everyone can hear me. So I'll go very briefly through my report with the understanding that this report was shared with the board members on Thursday. It was published on our website on Thursday and will stay there for everyone who is interested to go through it. When it comes to voter registration statistics, very briefly, our numbers are more or less steady. We have 702,000 registered active voters in Montgomery County. In my report, I provide the breakdown per political party, and I also provide a cumulative party registration change if I looked at the last report that I produced for the board and share with the public. When it comes to the State Board of Elections, I would like to report to the board and everyone who is listening that the law requires every county to submit a request for waiver if the county would like to provide more language assistance than it's legally required through the new part of the election law, which is called language assistance program. I requested the approval from the board and submitted a waiver to the state board to extend that assistance and provide a voter information guide in Korean and in Korean and what was the French, Korean and French on our website. The request was approved, so we are preparing that voter information guide. I believe that I hope soon we will have English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, American, Korean, and French voter information guide available on our website. The second thing is that I need to report about the state board that came after my report was prepared. The state board issued a press release announcing that the potential new vendor of the new voting system will do legally required public demonstration of that new voting system at 3 locations throughout the state from March 23rd to March 25th. One location is in Montgomery County, that is Hilton Garden Inn in Rockville-Gettysburg at 14975 Shady Grove Road. The demonstration will be available from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. in those days. So anyone who is interested might go and see a potential new voting system. The fact the public demonstration is taking place doesn't mean that contract is awarded. Public demonstration is a part of the application process, and each vendor has to do it that is selected. So when it comes to the personnel, I would like to announce that Mr. Jared Ford was selected for the position of voter education training specialist. We are interviewing for the position of manager of outreach, recruitment, and training. When it comes to temporary positions, again, we are slowly but surely increasing the number of our temporary team members who will be with us. Primarily, we currently have 32, but most of them are recruitment and training because the focus is on election judges. When it comes to budget, I think that our spending and our projections are per what we estimated earlier this year. A heavy spending season is coming as we are getting closer to the elections. When it comes to voter services, regular ongoing voter registration work never stops. The same goes for the vote by mail. Any application that comes in has to be processed. Our candidate filing was concluded on 24th of February. We processed, the team processed our paperwork for 143 candidate filing applications, 133 of them are active. Again, any up-to-date information of all the candidates is available on our website or the state website. Voting system and information technology section. Annual inventory, we are following the state schedule on many of the activities related to the voting equipment. We are working with our colleagues from TABS on election resource management system. The system was launched on March 5th. When I later talk about our recruitment, our election judges, volunteers, they are using already the system as they are applying. And we are still doing the review of site documents in order to meet ADA requirements as they are developed now following federal DOJ instructions. Election operations section. Again, we are getting closer to election. We are preparing the ballot order. How many ballots will be prepared, printed, and distributed, sent to us for us to distribute for early voting and polling places on election day. And we are organizing supplies per early voting election day locations. When it comes to outreach, I'm not going too much details. Gilberto will cover that in his portion. So when it comes to recruitment of election judges, I have to talk about two things here. The first one is the state board policy and the legal requirement, which requires from me to inform the board about assignment of election judges and achieved levels of parity between the two major political parties in state of Maryland. Again, I have to report to the board that I don't have anything to report, because today we had a first training scheduled for election judges, and the board and the public will understand that we canceled those trainings because of the inclement weather that we went through. Unless someone goes through the training, passes the training, we cannot do the assignment. So we have not assigned a single individual to single position. I know that in the April board meeting, I will prepare a report as required by law and the state board policy on election judges parity. So on Thursday, we had 1,392 prospective volunteers who used our new system and renewed or submitted the application. We looked at the numbers today because weekends are kind of the best days when our volunteers go online and do what's required. 1,392 went to 1,616. So we added 200 volunteers who did applications over the weekend. We had 413 volunteers who finished the quiz on Thursday. That number is 774 now. Again, people take weekends to sit down and do the quiz properly on their own time. As of today, on Thursday again, we have 222 people who signed up for in-person training by the end of March. That number is 357 today. So again, we will keep moving on. We will keep advertising. We still keep asking the board, campaigns, anyone to anyone who is interested to sign up and serve as a election judge. I just looked at the party distribution of these numbers this morning as I stand. I can say just for the number of active applicants, that's the only one that I picked up properly. I looked at all about this not really indicated. Out of 1,616 active applicants who went through the system, there's 1,060 Democrats, 162 Republicans, 355 unaffiliated, and 39 others. So, again, we will keep tracking this. We will keep tracking the numbers. Our goal is to meet the legal requirement to have parity to the extent possible. But again, we need more Republican volunteers. As of today, even if all those who signed up, who expressed interest, if they pass the quiz, pass the training, and end up serving, we don't have enough numbers to have parity of chief judges, let alone all the judges in the county. Again, I just want to reassure the board and the public that staff is paying attention to this. I know that Gilberto will talk about number of events that he attended, that board members organized for us to reach out to the Republican voters directly. But I also have to say, in my personal opinion, we do around 400 outreach events in a year. That number is, I believe, higher than any other county in the state, or could be higher than most of the counties in the state combined. For me, all those outreach events are all Republican events, all Democratic events, all unaffiliated events. So we are doing extra effort. We find different venues how to communicate with different with voters of different party affiliation, and any passing on the message that we can get in addition to our effort is always welcome. Again, more on this in April when we have actually some assignments. We will see where the numbers are. So again, the last part was about the training, because I wanted to report on the first training that was held this morning. I cannot because it was canceled because of the weather. So more on the training for the next board meeting. That will be election director report.
Okay. I'll just comment that the issue of trying to get more Republican election judges has been here for as long as I've been on the board, and it's very hard to have parity when the county has the registration that it has. And I appreciate that the staff has made some extra efforts in recent years to recruit more Republican judges. If any of our members have suggestions for more things that we can be doing, I'm happy to have them, and we're definitely doing our part to recruit as many as we can. But when there's 4 times as many Democrats as Republicans in the county, that's a very high hill to climb to try to get to so-called parity meaning, I think, 50-50, which is, that's a very ambitious goal. But on the other hand, we are nothing if not ambitious. We do lots of things that are very hard to do, and this is certainly in that category. And again, if anyone has any suggestions for more that we can be doing in this area, happy to get people's suggestions. Are there any questions or comments for Boris on the director's report?
David?
Okay, seeing none.
David, Alex does.
Oh, I'm sorry, Alex, did you have your hand up?
I did.
I apologize, Alex. Go right ahead.
Boris, I wanted to know a little bit more about this this new election system that's going to be demonstrated. Can you tell me a little bit more about the origins of what's going on with that, and what the system actually is? Is it a new device? Are we introducing some entirely new method of voting, or is it just an improvement of some existing device that we already have?
So when we talk about voting system, we are talking about scanners that are used at the polling places and early voting centers. We are talking about ballot marking devices or express vote, someone might refer. and the high-speed scanners that are used in the building to scan vote by mail that are provided through chemists. I think that these pieces of equipment, it's timely to replace them. The plan is to have them in place in 2028. And we are currently using ESNS voting system, scanners, ballot marking devices, or high-speed scanners. And the vendor that will do the public demonstration of these dates is ESNS, as they were bidding for the new voting system in Maryland. My understanding is that we are talking about improvements, but if you know what the scanner, if you recall the scanner from the polling place, and the ballot marking device, that is what composes the new voting system here.
Are there other companies that may potentially bid or
Alex,
want to
we cannot hear
demonstrate?
you.
Can you hear me?
Alex, you
I
may
can hear
want to
you,
mute
Alex.
and unmute.
I can hear Alex too.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us, David?
Oh,
I can hear everyone else.
yes, sorry, that was on me. Please repeat whatever you said. I'm sure it was very important.
Well, I don't know about that. I just was wondering whether there are other vendors that may bid on these contracts and may want to demonstrate equipment. You know, does ESNS have any competition as far as we're looking at?
So the procurement process for the new voting system is run by the State Board of Elections, and I cannot say that I'm privy to all the bids that they received and the assessments that they followed to select this voting system. I know that this public demonstration is the part of the process. My understanding is that the whole process still has to be presented to the Board of Public Works. But again, State of Maryland voting system is selected by the State Board of Elections and implemented, carried out by local jurisdictions, all 44 of us. And the State Board is the agency, department that deals with the procurement of the new voting system with the state procurement office, I would assume.
I'd like to suggest to everyone, I'd like to.
No, you're mute. David, you're mute now.
I'm sorry.
There you go.
So I just like to suggest to everyone that if you have the time to stop by, there's 3 days where there's a Montgomery County location where we can see the equipment. It might be worthwhile to do. If we have any input, that would be the way we would have input, is to see it demonstrated, et cetera. I believe it is next week that it is going to be available for those. It's during business hours, but it's I think Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I certainly plan to find time to check it out if I can. And I realize everyone's busy, but if you can, it might make sense to do so. We have a very limited role, if any. But certainly if we see both positives and negatives and just neutral things that we want to share, that would be one way to find out. Margie, you had, Boris.
Just add one thing. I spoke to Gilberto. We on our social media, we will push out the State Board of Elections press release that talks about this and announces locations, but tomorrow, because we didn't want to overlap with all the communication that was going on because of the weather and everything. So
okay,
we will push out for anyone who is interested, because we would like our voters to go to Rockville,
right, and to
see
sure.
first-hand voting system.
Sure, thank you. I'll come to you, Larry. I think Margie had her hand up first.
Yeah, just really quickly, and this might have already been addressed, but I think when David or Boris speaks, there's an echo. So like after you finish speaking, maybe mute. So it just then becomes confusing because then we hear the sounds overlap. So just wanted to note that on our end, it might not be coming on your end because you might have the sound muted.
Yes, thank you for that.
And then I did have another point that I
go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
actually did.
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
had a quick question about the volunteer applications. We definitely have a lot of prospective volunteers even with just the initial submission of applications, do you usually see that number go up, or is this like the highest amount we get after the initial renewal of the application or the new application submitted?
You might hear you might hear me saying many things. But if you ever hear me saying that we have enough volunteers to apply, please just remind me. That will never happen. Number is really good for the first 10 days. However, we need 3,500 to 4,000 people to serve on election day. During early voting, we need another 2,800 service days, meaning some people can serve multiple days. Historically, we have attrition problem. Let's say 10,000 people sign up. Another out of the 10,000, certain percentage does not take online quiz. Those who take online quiz, certain percentage of them don't take in-person quiz, person training. And those who take quiz and in-person training, we have a 200 to 300 of them who actually do not end up serving on election day for various reasons. I'm not pointing fingers. So the numbers, initial numbers are good, but there is a long road ahead of us to meet the requirement to be fully staffed during early voting and election day. Keep in mind, it hasn't happened for ages in Montgomery County, but we would love to have some backup, some people, election judges on standby, especially because we experienced for the last election, especially 2024 primary, that at some polling places we had the last moment, too many of the last moment cancellations. So again, one way ahead, but numbers look good at the first days.
Okay, I think I missed the last couple of things, Boris. Your sound is getting garbled at times, and I don't know if anyone else is having that issue.
Okay, because I turned off my sound while you were speaking. So I don't, is my sound garbled or just Boris?
No,
It's just Boris. I think
just Boris.
I think it's his mic might not be. But I mean, it's something that can be addressed later. I just wanted to flag it because I am missing parts of what you're saying. But we can talk about this later. So just wanted to note that.
Well, it was all brilliant. I just want to make that clear.
Well, and David, it pays to be sitting right across the table.
It does. That's why, that's why I'm letting you know, in case you were wondering, it was brilliant. I don't know if you all have any questions that you need repeated. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Larry, go ahead.
No problem. I just wondered if staff is going to go to this equipment demonstration, when might that be? Because I wouldn't mind being there when they're there.
That's a good point. Boris, why don't you just answer through my
Okay.
Can
you hear me if I answer through David's computer?
Yes.
Okay. So I know that I'll go for certain and staff will go. The problem is we are not necessarily fully the masters of our calendar, so I cannot respond today what time we are going. But if you give me by the end of the week, Larry, I can send you some times.
Why don't you send it to all of us?
I can do that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, that would be very helpful to get your all's thoughts about it. There's a large amount of expertise in this building. Any other questions for Boris? All right, before we move on to the board attorney's report, I did get one additional question from an anonymous attendee, so I'm going to try and answer it from our previous conversation. The question was, our candidate is running at large and has a last name towards the end of the alphabet. How many pages will there be for the 17 candidates on the express vote method? How can we direct voters ahead of time? Do we know how many candidates are on each page? My recollection is it is 7 candidates on a page. Okay, so Boris says that's his recollection as well. So if you're watching, that would mean the first 7 alphabetically on page 1, the second 7 alphabetically on page 2, the last 3 on page 3. How can you direct voters ahead of time? I believe that, the specimen ballot will be available for, doesn't it get public inspection at some point after they put together the ballot? I guess not the ballot marking device necessarily, just the ballot itself. I think that you will need to I think you will need to do your own communications, as will we, that will tell people to be aware of this problem. Obviously, we've been aware of it and have been telling voters about it ever since we've been aware of it. But generally, it's 7 on a page. And the best thing you can do is to remind voters of the need to get to page 2 and 3. And they will not be able to complete their ballot without looking at pages 2 and 3. It's not that they will miss those pages completely. It's that they could use up their 4 votes for council at large before they get to the 3rd page, and then have to go back and undo some of their votes in order to be able to vote at the end. That is the concern. Larry.
I just wanted to remind people that the election day and early voting staff who take people to ballot marking devices have very specific instructions what to tell the voter on multi-page offices. They tell you how to get there, and the campaign should also know that you press this button 3 times to get to me. But the person who sits you down at the BMD knows precisely how to do that. They tell you that it's in written instructions as well. So that's a help. It's not foolproof, as you say. It doesn't prevent the question of having to go back, which could use some instruction too. But there are instructions there that cover the multi-page, office. So.
And to answer the follow-up question that I received, yes, it is alphabetical by last name under state law, not our decision, state law decision. So, understand that this board has been pushing for a solution to this problem for literally 10 years. Alex even managed to leave and come back, and we're still pushing the issue. So, I'm cautiously optimistic that it will be improved for next time. Okay. Let's move on, Kevin, to your report, board attorney's report.
And just to follow up on what Larry said about the ballot marking device, this has occurred on more than one occasion. And while candidates shouldn't bank on it, the candidates that have actually appeared on not the first page, but have appeared on the second page, they've won on the occasions where it's actually been more than one page. Because we not only had it for county council, but we had it for circuit court judges on one occasion as well. So the process between the instructions that the election judge gives you and the fact that you can't skip any pages, I mean, there are some safeguards there, but obviously it would be helpful for it to be fixed moving forward. So with that said, let me just start off with the Republican National Committee lawsuit. As you all will recall, that suit was filed by the National Committee, the State Committee, and 2 plaintiffs against the state administrator, the state board of election board members, the Howard County board members, and the Montgomery County board members, alleging a violation of the National Voter Registration Act with regard to list maintenance. We had filed a motion. All the defendants had filed a motion to dismiss. The oppositions to the motions were due on Friday. We began discussions on Wednesday or Thursday, I forget when, where the plaintiffs had indicated that they did not feel that the local boards needed to be necessary parties to the litigation moving forward. That they would proceed against the state administrator and the state board members. And you should have on Friday or Saturday gotten the amended complaint as well as the stipulation that basically dismisses you all as defendants in that case. So in terms of moving forward, the amended complaint has been filed. It's been accepted by the court. The state will now need to respond to the amended complaint by April 24th. The plaintiffs will have until May 8th to file a response. The state will have until May 29th to file their reply. So the issue really won't be addressed until probably after the general election. And if the case is dismissed in its entirety, then there'll be no discovery. If the case is not dismissed in its entirety, the court will issue a scheduling order at that point, and discovery will begin. The Montgomery County Board of Elections, like every other local board, will need to cooperate in connection with whatever discovery is needed of a non-party, which is part of the stipulation that was forwarded to you. Boris has maintained the preservation of evidence, which will continue throughout the litigation. But the good news is you all are no longer defendants in the case. So that part of it is good news, and we'll just have to stay tuned for how Judge Gallagher rules on the preliminary motions involving the state. Any questions about the lawsuit itself? Okay. So that part is resolved. Now, yesterday, you should have gotten an amended policy that I drafted with regard to the use of photographs. You'll recall that in August, the board passed a policy on August 4 regarding photographs. And the amendment that I have drafted is really to try and hopefully provide some context of when photographs can and cannot be used, because I think the board's intent was that photographs should not be used for purposes of an endorsement of a candidate or used as opposition to a candidate or a question. And the way the policy itself was originally drafted, I think made it much broader than was ultimately intended at first, because it addressed, people, arguably people that had social functions or cultural functions that were going on that elected officials were at, or testifying. So the policy now is longer, but I'm hopeful that it is putting in context, what would be an appropriate use of photographs and what would not be an appropriate use of photographs, because the reality is we live in a world where everyone has an iPhone or some sort of camera that they walk around with, and they take pictures and they post things on social, on their Facebook page and things like that. And I don't really view those as endorsements of a particular candidate. So the goal behind the amended policy was to try and put in more proper context when it would be appropriate to be able to use a photograph. Hopefully everyone's had an opportunity to review the policy as amended, and I'm happy to answer any questions. But it really was, the modifications that I had made were based upon, quite frankly, having to call candidates and tell them to take pictures down where I don't think that they were really in a context of really being an endorsement of any particular candidate. I think they were just pictures taken at various events.
Okay. Alex, I'll call on you in a moment. I gather that we need a motion to approve the revised policy. So I would be happy to make that motion to approve the revised policy. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. Seconded by Daniel. Alex, go ahead.
Kevin, I mean, I'm trying to sort of understand what the practical reality of this is. Is this sort of intended to address when you have an elected official who might have a picture of us on social media or in a different context that was not their actual campaign website? Is that sort of what you're looking at?
Right. it wouldn't necessarily, I mean, there are a lot of candidates and elected officials that have more than one either, Facebook page or more than one social media. It's not their official campaign page. They just may have a Facebook page, for example, that they take pictures and they put them up from various social events, either central committee events, things of that nature. And so, if it's an official campaign page, then it would be clearly, I think, viewed as an endorsement, and that can't be done. On the other hand, if it's in another context, where it's quite frankly almost on their personal, Facebook page, it would be permissible because it wouldn't necessarily be, an endorsement of that particular candidate.
But you could envision a situation where somebody might not have it on their official website, but the way they posted it and the words they may have used to describe it could be, in effect, a way to suggest an endorsement. So that would reserve to you the right to, say that in that particular situation, it violated the policy.
Correct. I clearly envisioned that I was not smart enough to come up with a policy that would encapsulate every scenario. So the policy itself reserved the right for, based upon the facts and the circumstances, to go ahead, and even if it's not on their official campaign website, that it would be appropriate for it to be removed.
Kevin, you're referring to yourself as not being smart enough has gotten laughs from all the members of the board. But it's definitely the case whenever we have a policy that, when you start off, you learn about things after you implement it as to how it's implemented and how it can be perfected. I'll tell you, Alex, that I'm very reluctant to have my photo taken in kind of ambiguous situations, where it's not clear and where someone could use it and make it look like an endorsement. But on the other hand, if you're at a public meeting, and I've been testifying at meetings, and actually so have you, and if someone were to use our testimony, that clearly is not a campaign context unless they were to put it into a campaign context. And I think that's what Kevin is seeking to address here. Okay, Alex, are you done? And then I'll call on Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, Kevin is so smart. I believe one of the issues I had with, well, it wasn't an issue, but it was a concern I had with the policy as it stand, and now being revised, I believe, made it very clear. Is the fact that the policy kind of addressed the First Amendment, in terms of considerations, especially when people are in, public events, right? And photos are taken of any of us at those public events with an elected official or someone who is running for office. So, in my review of the policy, the amended policy, I believe Kevin, in his wisdom, actually addressed that. So, Kevin, you are indeed a wise guy.
A wise guy in more ways than one. Yeah. Thank you, Daniel. I would just say that I don't know that the candidates have a First Amendment right to use our likeness. But I do know that anytime we're talking about limitations on people's expression, the First Amendment comes into play. So, and I think that the revision that Kevin has proposed does make very clear that the circumstances in each case has to be looked at. I know that I've given testimony a couple of times recently, and I've been telling people they can't use my photograph, but that doesn't really make it a campaign context, I guess, is what it comes down to, which is really what we're trying to avoid is people trying to use us or our staff as an indicator of political support, because we are, by definition, we are neutral. So further comments about the proposed change? Okay, it's been moved and seconded, sadly, this is only for voting members. All those in favor, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Okay, thank you very much. And Boris, if you can make sure that the revised policy is
Will be published.
gets all the places it needs to be. Kevin, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about?
I do not.
Okay, then we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is 2026 election legislation. Boris, is that you?
This is me, but I'll make it very brief because we provided the same list of the legislation with the movements of certain pieces of legislation through the House, through the Senate, or cross-filing, but nothing major on our end changes. We look towards the end of the legislation process to figure out one of the bills that was raised during Q&A session is buses stops at the early voting sites, because we'll have to do some work on our end in terms of promotion and sit down with our colleagues from DOT if that bill becomes a law. And I don't know, David, if you want to go back to Alex's questions.
Yes, I do. I wanted to give you a chance first, but I definitely do. So, Alex, help me out so that I can, if I remember correctly, you're basically asking kind of what's the dispute, I guess, between the House and the Senate. Essentially, a majority of the House was uncomfortable with having the law take effect for current members of our board. And none of the other 22 jurisdictions had it take effect for the current members of their boards, but none of the other 22 jurisdictions, to my knowledge, had their substitute members attending all of their meetings and paid them the same amount of money. And the pay is a key fact for the Maryland Constitution, because under the Maryland Constitution, you cannot increase someone's pay in the middle of their term. We are not proposing to do that. We are proposing to pay them the same, but to give them voting rights.
Oh, I see. So the House was talking about having all this take effect in June of 27 when a new term begins for all of them, whether they return or not.
Right.
Correct. That
Okay.
is what they were doing. And I lobbied against that amendment with the approval of this board. I don't see, I think we've waited too long. I'm embarrassed to have waited this long, and I put it on myself. I mean, there's plenty of other people it could be put on as well, but while I wasn't paying attention, 22 other boards made this change and we didn't, and so to me, it's long past time. There was a limitation on the 22 others. That's not a limitation on us. So from my perspective, I don't see a reason for us to wait. It's one Democrat and one Republican. It doesn't change the balance of the board. And obviously our substitute members do all the work that everyone else does. On a lot of the boards, the substitute members don't even attend the meetings when the regular members, or at least what it used to be there's only one other board now that has substitute members. But on many of these boards, under the state law, substitute members would get paid. If it's not provided otherwise in the budget, they get paid per meeting they attended. And there was not an expectation that they attended every meeting. We have much higher expectations and have, since I was a substitute member, going back to 2011 and really before that. I was not the first substitute member to attend all the meetings. There were plenty before that. So and also Montgomery County is not like the other counties in many other respects. We have 7 members. The 22 other counties have 5. We have a 25-foot electioneering boundary. The other 22 have 100 feet. We have a statute that requires a bipartisan vote to appoint an election director. The other 22 don't. And we can go on with that. And then some argued at the delegation level that this was unprecedented. to do it for sitting board members. And it's only unprecedented in the sense that the 22 other boards of elections didn't do this. There's lots of examples in state law where the legislature changed the votes of bodies in the state in the middle of their terms. The Supreme Court decision of the Maryland Supreme Court that Kevin found us was an example where the Anne Arundel County Board of Education Nominating Commission had 5 gubernatorial appointees, and the legislature removed them in the middle of their term and literally kicked them off the nominating commission and added other people instead. And the Supreme Court unanimously found that that was permitted. And of course, that doesn't even get into how the legislature has done plenty of other unprecedented things. The Montgomery County House delegation, for example, unanimously supports local legislation on ranked choice voting. No other jurisdiction in the state is doing that. So anyway, I am until instructed otherwise. I am continuing, and some of you have been helping, and I appreciate it. But I'm continuing to make the case. And as you heard me say, the senators unanimously agreed that there's no reason to wait.
Well, and if there was an important issue whose resolution was even more long-standing than the ballot marking device problem, this is probably it, right?
Well, and quite frankly, this is what I've been saying. We don't know what 2026 is going to bring. Okay, and that's not just 2026. That's every election. Every election, something happens that we're not. That we don't know it's gonna happen. We've had bad weather. We've had COVID. We've had all kinds of different things. Every election is different. But I will say that there's no benefit to us to have 2 classes of board members if we have something come up in 2026 and the right people to send to deal with it are our substitute members who are, as far as we're concerned, they're full members. And they have been, and they were vetted in exactly the same fashion. Kevin reminded me because one of the arguments that was being made here was that this somehow impinges on the governor's right to make appointments. Well, the governor appointed our substitute members, and the governor vetted our substitute members, and so did the state senate, and so did the party central committees. They were vetted in exactly the same fashion as the rest of us. To me, I'm not inclined to, at least yet, to give this up. The Senate agreed with us. The House, did not. And there's still, roughly a month left in the session. And, we certainly want to fix this, for the future, but I would rather fix it this year than next year, if that's at all possible. If board members have a different view, let me know. But thus far, every time I've asked the question, the answer continues to come back that we should stick to our position. So, Daniel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. President, and to demonstrate my support for this, which I believe is way past time, and there should be no delay in it. Definitely, I'll continue to, advocate on behalf of.
Thank you.
But also, as I say, to demonstrate my support, whenever we have virtual meetings, and when there's a time to vote, you see me turn off my camera. Please indicate that that's the time that you can call on our substitute member to vote.
Okay. Daniel is engaging in some civil disobedience here. That he wants to have this happen sooner rather than later. So okay. Appreciate that. Basically, what it comes down to is, will the House delegation insist on their amendment, or will they defer to the Senate now that the Senate has not deferred to the House? And that's where we stand with our delegations. I had talked to some senators, and I know some others may have as well. I was still surprised to get a unanimous vote out of them. That was a pretty strong statement on their part. And as I'm sure we all know, House members and senators don't necessarily agree on lots of issues. And that's true at the national level. That's true at the local, at the state level. That's, it's true everywhere. So we will continue to work on this issue. But I appreciate the support of everyone on the board. And I should just announce for the record, I think I did it by email, but since we last met, Larry Halloran has been confirmed by the Maryland Senate. So he is now officially completely on board. Yes, that definitely is worthy of applause. So he is with us until I think it's June 7th of 2027. So whether he will have a vote during that time period, we'll find out. But in any event, he'll have a vote in canvas, obviously. So, okay.
David, I just want to thank you for all your work on this. It's really appreciated.
Absolutely, Larry. It was my pleasure. I would be running into the chair of the Executive Nominations Committee on the streets of Annapolis, and I would remind him. I said, "Now, one of my members is in your committee." And he always said, "Oh yeah, I remember." So anyway, apparently he remembered. So that was that was good. Okay, thank you. Okay, so we're done with the legislative update. So next is the website update. Boris.
It'll be just very brief. David and I, we are kind of guessing every month how much will the increase be following month. But if you look at the report that I prepared, December, January, February, the increase is there. And I think this is just indicative of the season that's coming as we are getting closer to the election day. There are no major changes. We all like voters to use our website, but we are really, really happy that their focus now is how to serve as election judge web pages, especially visiting connection site that went up 2.5 times number of visits compared to the last month, because that's how the process should go. Anyhow, we will continue monitoring. Numbers are increasing as they should, but they are nowhere near where I hope they will be as we get, especially in May and June of this year.
Any questions for Boris about the website report? Daniel.
Mr. President, quick question on the voter guides. Would they be available on our website in all the languages that was approved?
So voter information guide will be available on our website in English, Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, American, French, and Korean. Again, last two languages are additions compared to what is
legally required
by the language assistance program that was passed by the legislature.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I want to thank you for that as well. I think that it's a great commentary on our commitment to all of our voters that we are going above and beyond what the law requires.
Yeah, there's only a small caveat here. Actually, quite few of caveats. Gilberto is working, and I'm very grateful to his work at the Community Partnerships Agency to prepare the translation of the voter information guide to different languages. Then we have to organize the pages somehow with all the images that exist, with the assumption that length of certain sentences doesn't match in every language, right? I know what we can what we can put on one page in English, usually is page and a quarter, page and a half in Spanish. And I cannot speak for Korean, French, American, Chinese, Vietnamese. So this will take some time. I have to look back. I think that we are legally required to put them all at the same time. So bear with us while we are going through this process. It's not simple. It hasn't been done before. It's a learning curve for all of us. But I think that our intention was clear from the very beginning. Therefore, I asked the board to give me right, to ask the waiver, the state board, we got it, so we will have it on our website. Just bear with us so we can do it right.
Thank you, sir. The only last thing I would ask, Boris, is if you can please notify the board once they're available so that, because I just want to rush everybody in there from our Amharic speaking community, our French speaking community, and all the other languages as well, so that they could actually go and download. And I don't know if we're able to track the downloads. I wanted to create a new word there, but now. It'll be good. It'll be good for us to, if we're able to track the downloads, it'll be good. At least we know, in terms of how many people downloaded those individual voter guides.
Yeah, Boris said he's going to look into that.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we can do it because just one link, but I'll let you take a look.
Thank you, Boris. We appreciate this very much.
Okay. I just think it's hilarious that Kina has her hand up and she's sitting right next to me. So anyway, Kina.
Thank you, Mr. President. All things considered, I also echo what our Vice President just shared regarding Boris and the team and Dr. Z, making sure that we have representation for French and Amharic speakers for our elections. I will also follow our Vice President's suits to make sure we amplify the message that this information is now available. And so we continue to make elections more accessible to not just one community, but several communities that access things like Amharic language or access French as well. In that same vein, is it possible to at least have a social media post promoting that this will become available so that people can at least, while we are waiting, share this and so that they can anticipate this post becoming, or rather the actual voter guide becoming available soon?
May I ask?
Yeah.
Just very briefly, we will definitely do the social media promotion. When I say we, Gilbert, right? Because I don't think that you want me to get those buttons.
We're happy with Dr. Z doing it.
Fair enough.
Yes.
My problem here is there are too many players involved in putting this final product together. And us raising the expectations on social media without having any idea what the final end date is. We are talking about, again, if we have limited control of it, I'm really reluctant to give. I can promise you it will happen. That is what we can promise because I know that we are working on it.
I understand, but you don't know exactly when.
Let me put it this way. We were trying to put the deadlines when each translation will happen. One individual went on leave. Okay, so things do happen. Life does happen, and we are talking.
To be clear, we're talking about individuals who don't work for the Board of Election.
Absolutely.
So it's not like we are keeping track of their leave schedule.
We cannot, and
Right.
you have to know that we booked our time ahead of time because they are busy. This county does everything in multiple languages, so we booked our time ahead of time. Again, too many moving parts, too many clients, but yeah, we will be more than happy to promote it left, right, center, up and down when it's possible. But let's get some dates down when we can have it ready. That is as honest answer as I can give.
Okay, it's the only kind we want. Okay, anything else, Kina?
No.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, let's move on to the outreach update with Dr. Zelaya. We've only mentioned him, 10 times before we got to him on the agenda, but maybe only 5.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah,
My pleasure. Yeah. So good afternoon. So piggybacking on Kina's question, yes, it's a coordinated effort with the Office of Community Partnerships. There's a lot of moving parts. So once they're all ready,
move it a little closer to you because you're almost off screen. Okay, you're good. You're good there. Okay.
So once all of the languages are prepped and ready, we will release. We'll do a big push on social media through our community partners, through the board members, through different county agencies, etc., including a press advisor, etc. So once it's ready, we'll do one big push. A lot of times, if you do a coming soon, then the minute you release it, someone's gonna call tomorrow. Is it ready? 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 So, but yes, as anything else, we'll do a big push both within the community within our partners, and within the county agencies. Moving forward, gratitude to the election worker and voter services suite for really supporting our desire to really reach out into our communities. We have a very diverse electorate. We have over 1.1 million residents. We have over 700,000 registered voters. People are moving in and out within Montgomery County or out of Montgomery County and from other states. So it's imperative that individuals not only register to vote, but update their registrations. Please note, as we've been pushing those messaging, that Maryland is a closed primary state. So if you need to consider your affiliation, unaffiliate or affiliate, do so please as soon as possible. There's also concerted effort to encourage registered Republicans to serve as election workers. And so, yes, we do recognize that Dems surpassed Republicans 4-1, but we have over 100,000 registered Republicans.
Yes.
So numerically, we're looking for civic-minded registered Republicans to help us out, and we will continue to knock on doors. But also on those doors, in particular, gratitude Chairman Melby for opening the doors once again last week in their main office. Also gratitude to Ami. Last month, we did do a call to action to the Central Committee. We talked about the importance of working as partners to identify within those 100,000 registered Republicans to help us out as we're near both the primary election and early voting and moving forward to the general and beyond. Same thing we share with them and with anyone else that we speak, regardless if they're partisan or not, the importance to registering to vote, update your voter registration, the mail-in ballot request, or to get off the permanent list. There's also a process for that as well. So we want to make sure individuals make those decisions, those vote plans, so they're not surprised and are asked to vote a provisional ballot. There are safeguards involved as we near early voting, and we'll be talking in addition to ballot drop boxes in the post office. Polling places and early voting centers will have the yellow mail-in ballot bags where individuals could submit their mail-in ballots. So as we near the elections, our messaging will change as well. As of this weekend, we've conducted over 300 events, and we have an additional 100 lined up between now and the primary election. So we're very, very active. So once again, a call to action from the community, no matter how big or small. If there's an event where you think we should bring our table and our tent and our forms, etc., by all means, just email us, drop us a line, reach us through our board members or through the staff or myself, and just help us set up those pins, and we will knock them down and we will engage. We're also starting what we did over the last couple of elections, kind of a little project called What We're Doing and What You Can Do. It's kind of behind the scenes, 30-second little videos of different aspects, because a lot of times voters don't understand that our process is very manual. It's not automated like these massive Fortune 500 companies. We still got to use our digits and our two hands to prep these things, counting how many pencils will go out, assembling the VAT boxes that we need to assemble. There's a lot of moving parts. So we had last weekend, we did a little what we're doing, what you could do as showcasing our trainers as they were conducting their train to trainer as they got ready for today. Of course, that it was canceled, our first training session, but we do encourage individuals, especially young voters, to follow us on our social media handles, which is Facebook, Instagram, X, and Blue Sky. And we'll be putting those videos on a weekly basis, something there's a lot of moving parts, but we want to share what we do as we lead to an election, so you have a better picture of all the effort that goes here. And then also there was a question earlier about public transportation and routes to early voting centers. Just to let you know that in the sample ballot and voters guide, as in years past, there is a WMATA and Department of Transportation QR code that you could scan, and it takes you to their trip planner portal, and you can make your trip by date, by time, etc. So there's tools that will be afforded to our voters once those sample ballots and once we post the voter guide on our website.
That's for both WMATA and Right-On?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Great.
It's from both. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And those are my notes.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you, Dr. Z. Kina,
Thank you, Dr. Z. Just quick.
loud enough so that people can hear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Quick question about the Pick a Pal promotion that's happening. Will there be additional information shared online about the promotion?
I could take that back to the team so they could share information on that.
Excellent.
What is Pick a Pal?
You know, I'm not the one. I will apologize. I don't know everybody.
Very brief. So the idea is, if you come to serve for the first time
Yes.
and you refer a friend, a pal,
Mm-hmm.
and that pal ends up serving as election judge, you join a competition in order to win a prize or a couple of prizes that we get. You're talking about movie tickets, a jar, a photo with us, just small recognition of the effort that you actually came to serve for the first time.
And then also recruited
Wrote a
somebody.
pal. We-
Okay. Has this been run by Kevin?
No, this is a recruitment team. We're running this for like 4, 5 years
Yeah.
now.
So that's been several cycles.
Yeah.
Okay. I would, I'm not saying that I think it's a problem. I'm just saying that I'll be happy when he can tell us that there's no problem with offering inducements to people who are recruiting election judges. It's content neutral, so it's, you know, and it's not, and it's party neutral, and it's, you know, so but I would just like to,
I think we have it since 20.
So
They're referring people.
Yeah.
right, they're referring people, but we're also then, if they refer, is it random or is it the person who refers the most people?
it's random.
Selection is random.
The selection is random. So basically, anyone who refers someone to be an election judge they get their name put into a hat,
Yes.
and you pick someone out and they get a prize.
Oh, forget it. Yes.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, I'm happy. Thank you.
Fair
I just wanted to make sure because, well, you know, I don't even have to say, you know. So,
Thanks to the team for putting that together.
Yes.
I'm a big fan for anything that revolves around that referral of any kind. So
If my memory serves me well, I think high school students were the winners last year. Yeah.
I did.
Anyhow, but
Yeah.
it's a nice program. It's
Yes.
just we appreciate every time we have friends or family members to
Yes.
come and serve together, because this is how the commitment gets deeper.
yeah, no, Refer a Friend is a great program. So thank you for pulling it together again.
And in addition, quick call to our high schoolers. If you have an interest in acquiring additional student service learning credits, election judge service is an excellent opportunity to give to your community and earn some SSL hours, especially if you're looking for that special 250 tassel as you near your graduations. But also the stipend is available as well. Pick one or the other. Unfortunately, can't pick both. But if you wanted to, you could do the primary SSL or the stipend and switch up for the general.
okay, anything else for Dr. Z? Okay, once again, a big thank you for everything you're doing, and we appreciate it. And in particular, thank you for that outreach about Republican judges, which I know we very much need.
And we
So-
would do all our efforts, but it's a call to everyone.
Right.
This is a community event. But once again, follow us on social media, and we will put those little vignettes of behind the scenes, which are very interesting. And lastly, as we near future vote recruitment, we'll also do a push. We're not ready for that as well, but that's coming up for our younger cohorts, our younger students.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so next on our agenda is old business. Is there any old business? Okay, then we go to new business, and the first is a motion to delegate the appointment of election workers and judges for the 2026 gubernatorial elections, which I gather is both primary and general.
My understanding, Kevin, that one motion covers the whole cycle.
Yes, it does. One motion will cover both.
Okay. Does someone want to make this motion? Everyone understand what we're doing? Okay, Ami?
Oh. Can you explain that, David? Delegate, did you say?
Yes, what we're doing is rather than having a pro forma motion where we get a list of 4,000 names or 3,000 names or however many names of election judges where we vote to appoint election judges. And we did this in 2024, I know. Did we do it before 2024? I don't remember. But whatever the case, we are delegating to the election director the ability to appoint election judges so that we don't have to have a vote of the board in order to do that. Did I summarize that approximately right?
That's correct. And it's got a practical effect, which is, you know, Boris will continue to, I mean, people continue to get recruited and assigned right up until election day. So it's virtually impossible for the board to do the appointment.
And not necessarily a good use of board time for us to, at every meeting, to be voting for more people, the vast majority of which we won't know anything about.
Correct.
You know, we obviously, the longer I'm on the board, the more people I know who are election judges, but it's still going to be a small portion of the whole picture. You know, and we're really not the ones who are monitoring, you know, whether they pass the tests that are required, whether they've done their training requirements. That's all done by the staff as well. Okay, Ami.
I so move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, seconded by Kina, moved by Ami and seconded by Kina, that we delegate the appointment of election workers and election judges for the 2026 gubernatorial elections to the election director. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. And Daniel is protesting. So Margie, you get to vote. Okay, it is unanimous with Margie voting in Daniel's place. And thank you. Next on the agenda is the media advertising budget. Boris, are you presenting that, or?
I just need to say a few remarks at the very opening before Roberto does presentation.
Okay, great.
So when you look at the media and advertising budget, we are still looking at the same $70,000 as it was in previous years. I know that board has expressed desire that was articulated to the county executive as well, for us to increase this funding, especially knowing the postmark issue and the necessity to educate voters as we are getting closer to the election. And that was for the fiscal 27, for the general election. For the primary, we still have 70,000. I can just tell the board that we are trying to talk to our colleagues in the county and looking at our finances of the board, if there are savings that could be potentially diverted for us to match in the primary what we will spend in the general election.
That would be awesome.
Voter education, especially knowing, and board president mentioned a couple of times today, when we have close elections, we have them with primary historically. And every vote counts in the primary in general, but we want everyone to grasp the knowledge and change their voting pattern as soon as possible to limit the number of untimely ballots if there are postmark issues after the primary election. So that's one is on me and Lisa to keep talking to the counties and digging where the money is available in this fiscal year. But in meanwhile, Gilberto will explain.
Before you get to that, I'm going to say let board members know if we can be of assistance, because I think that's really important. And I do want to just point out that maybe not for every voter, but certainly for a large number of voters, that our efforts in the primary could be remembered in the general election. And so, you know, repetition, we all know, is very important in messaging. And if we can, you know, if we can do some of it in the primary and then also do it in the general election, I think by the time of the general election, we'll have a large segment of the population that will have heard it. And
for us, apart from the advertising part, there is also this admin part, which we are not creating a precedent here, because need was recognized by the board, by the government, by I think everyone that we actually spoke to about this issue for the next fiscal year. So we are just trying to look backwards and address the issue as early as possible, not wait for the general election to start addressing it if the board rightly recognized the problem, even in 2025. That is basically on admin side. And
Well,
now,
and some people will also learn by doing. If we get them to adjust their timing for the primary, hopefully they can remember that for the general.
absolutely. And I think that, I mean, all due respect to everything, we should not miss an opportunity to educate.
Yes.
That is like, and there's one way to educate in non-election year. This will be educating with the example in your hand what to do with it, right? So act on it. That will be the message. It was theoretical in 2025 when we tell them consider returning early. Now you'll have it in your hand, the ballot. What you're gonna do with it? Are you gonna get it hand stamped, use our drop boxes, send it week earlier, or something like that? So that is where we stand.
Okay. Dr. Z.
Yes, so thank you. So moving forward, similar to what we did in the last election, I propose and we spoke to the committee of moving forward with our partners. I think one of the things that I did want to communicate was the relationships built with my recommendations with these outlets is further enforced with the fact that everything has gone up in price. And so we've been able to leverage the same relationship with these vendors. Once we get the approval, I will approach them again for their support. Also want to recognize them because many of them did visit us during our second open house at the TCC, which was kind of nice to put a face with an email over the years. So we go through with this. I think overall, as presented to the board for the 70,375, I propose that 13,877 will go to Google AdWords, 14,998 to print media, which are the African Mirror, Senior Beacon, Korea Times, Washington Chinese, Washington Hispanic, iTraf advertisement, which is Mark, Vietnamese American Services. And then for the radio outlets, 41,500, and these are the top 10 outlets in the DMV: Radio America, El Sol, WMAL, Magic 102 FM, WPGC, WTOP, Wash FM, Hot 99.5, WMZQ 98.7, and also iHeart DC 101 for 41,500 for a total of 70,375.
Okay. Do the members of the committee have anything they'd like to add? I'm sorry, I can't see right now. Ami, go ahead.
I had my hand up.
I apologize. Go ahead.
Kina and I worked on this together, reviewing what had been proposed, and I think we both wholeheartedly agree that with the proposal.
Okay, I see Kina nodding her head, so I think that means that she's agreeing with the proposal. Any other comments from anybody? I'm trying to remember. Did anybody make a motion on this yet?
No, I don't think so, but I will move that we accept the budget.
Okay. Is there a second? Seconded by Kina. Moved by Ami, seconded by Kina. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it is 5-0. Thank you very much. I guess Daniel is still protesting. Daniel, I'm going to have to report on your protest to our state legislators that you are disappearing from view in order to make a point. So much appreciated. All forms of action are all legal forms of action are definitely appreciated. Okay. List of future actions from today's meeting.
Okay, this is what I have. Please add if I miss something.
Okay.
We will publish new photo policy that board approved today. I will notify the board members of when the staff is planning to go for the public demonstration of the new voting system. That might take some time to coordinate, but we will look at the possibility to track the number of downloads of voter guides in different languages. And yeah, these are the three that I have.
Okay, does anyone have any others that we can remember from today's meeting? Does for the new photo policy, are you thinking, is it just a posting, or, I mean, we did a press release on the original one. I don't know if it's worthy of a second one for a revision. It might not be.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know about the press release. I know that we will
Okay.
publish it, but
Okay.
you want to consider distributing in different
Okay,
ways.
I want to add one thing to the future action, which is I want to make sure that the video for today's meeting gets some kind of special attention on the webpage, because we had a number of candidates who asked for it. They wanted it to be emailed to them, but I think it's better if it's just somewhere that if there's a link for it on the front page or something that will help guide them to where it is. Because we also had a number of candidates who didn't who weren't able to be here.
This is we are getting into okay, as we are getting closer to election,
I understand. We have a lot of high priority messages.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that it has to be there forever.
How about this?
Yeah.
How about this? When the video is ready to be published, I believe tomorrow or day after tomorrow, I can pick up the link for the video, pick up the link for the presentation, and send it to same email, 200 email addresses that we invited for today's meeting.
Fine.
That works for everyone. So everyone will have it.
Everyone will have it in their inbox.
In their inbox, plus it will be on our website.
Okay.
That I think that's cleanest solution.
So will the link be too big to send? You said you're gonna just send them to the county's website, to our.
Yeah, I'll just send the link.
It's just going to be, right, he's not sending the document, he's sending the link.
So presentation and the video link.
That's perfect. That'll work. It's just there were a number of people who in the Q&A, they were saying, are you going to send us the presentation?
Yeah, it's very hard for us because we have a board will understand. We have so many voters who rely on computers or their phones to follow our website.
Right.
And when you start scrolling, we have to scroll down to find the contact them. So we are trying, as we're getting closer to election, to push voter registration up, vote by mail up, election days up.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely good with that. I just want to make sure that that the word gets out. And we had good attendance, but still, I'm sure there were people who weren't able to be here. Okay, anything else in terms of future actions from today's meeting? I think we covered everything. All right, so now we go to approval of the minutes. Usually the last email is Ami's. Is that the case this month?
I think so. I did not see one after my edit.
Okay,
I believe. Mr. President, I believe your email was the last one.
I sent one after Ami.
Oh,
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I thought Ami's was the last one.
Ami's was the last one. I'm looking at it now. Ami's email of March 5th.
Okay, well then that's it.
Hang on, at 8:22 a.m. She says,
God, I was up early.
You were up early. We appreciate all of your hard work. Daniel, we appreciated your review and then I reviewed as well. But the final version, the one that we would like to vote on would be that would incorporate everything that preceded it, would be the one that Ami sent around at that time. Is there a motion?
I move we accept it.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Daniel has disappeared once again. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving the minutes as revised, please raise your hand. It is unanimous. Okay, future meetings. Our April 20th meeting will be virtual. And our May 18th meeting will be in person so that we can be sworn in person as canvassers, because we are starting our canvas on June the 1st. So, which is right around the corner. So anyway, so please do plan. We can arrange for people to get sworn in on another occasion, but it'll be most convenient if we can be here on May the 18th in order to do it as a group. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
And David, I don't know if I told you, Karen's already confirmed that she's available on the 18th. She'll be there at 3 o'clock.
Okay, at 3 o'clock. Excellent. Thank you, Kevin, for that. That's on May 18th. And okay, so our meeting is adjourned, and I know. Okay, before we adjourn, first of all, we are having a closed session. Is that what you wanted to tell us? Okay, so you should have a link from Lisa that I guess I better go check and make sure I have it, although I'm sitting here with her.
Forwarded the link, so.
Jerry just sent it.
Okay, great. So when we adjourn today from this meeting, we will go to our executive session. And thank you all very much. And this public meeting is adjourned.
David?
Yes, Alex.
Oh, do we need to move to go into closed session and provide
Yeah.
a sufficient reason?
You know what? You are so right. You are so right. Alex, please make the motion.
Mr. President, I move that we go into executive session for the purpose of discussing, I think it is a change in policy on, it's not a budget related matter.
No, it's not. No, today it says to discuss public security, to include a discussion regarding the deployment of fire, police, and other emergency services during early voting on election day.
For that purpose, I move that the board, for that purpose of that discussion, I move that the board move into closed session.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, it is unanimous, 5-0.
Is there a break or you're just going to be okay?
No, we're gonna do a break to are people comfortable with going straight to the next meeting? You have to use a different link, but we're gonna.
Yeah, why don't we have a 5-minute break?
Okay, 5-minute break. See you on the other side.
6:10.
Okay, thank you very much.